Every Halloween, at the far end of our quiet little street, stands an old, decaying house, place shrouded in mystery, its walls silent, its windows dark, like hollow eyes watching the neighborhood. No one remembers a time when it wasn't abandoned. The yard is overgrown, a twisted mess of vines and weeds that seems to claw at the structure itself. It's the kind of house that every kid knows to avoid, even the bravest among us, the ones who dare each other to run up to it on ordinary days. Give it a wide berth when Halloween rolls around. But there's a twist, a mystery that seems too strange to be true. Every Halloween night, like clockwork, a bowl of candy appears on the front porch. It's not cheap. They're M&Ms, Reese's, even full-size bars sometimes. A plain black bowl just sitting there, filled to the brim, and no one ever sees who puts it there. No lights come on, no footsteps are heard, just the candy, waiting. You'd think it would be easy to dismiss as a Halloween prank, right? Just someone in the neighborhood trying to spook the kids. Maybe, but it's been happening for decades, long enough that people tell stories about it. Some say taking a piece brings good luck. Others say it's a curse. Most of us just glance at it, feel a chill, and hurry by. No one really talks about it. Maybe no one wants to admit that they're afraid. But last Halloween, something changed. I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. The way that house seemed to draw me in, like it was calling to me. The candy, the stories, the unspoken tension that settled over our street every year. It was all too much to ignore. I decided that was the year I'd find out the truth, one way or another. So, when the trick-or-treaters had all cleared out, and the streets were empty, I stayed behind, hidden just out of sight. I waited. Hours passed. The night grew colder, and my heart pounded in my chest as I stood in the shadows, watching. The candy bowl sat there on the porch, untouched, as if it was waiting to. And then, just when I was about to give up, something happened that still makes my skin crawl to this day. What I discovered that night turned every story, every rumor, and every creepy suspicion I'd ever had about that house into something darker than I could have imagined. It's a story that still haunts me, and maybe, after you hear it, it'll haunt you, too. As the street grew darker, I remained hidden, staring at that house. The candy bowl sat in the middle of the porch, almost glowing in the faint light of the street lamp, untouched. With each passing minute, the silence deepened, pressing down on me, and for the first time, I began to wonder, what was I hoping to find? A prankster? A neighbor who'd stayed hidden all these years, sneaking out only for Halloween? Or was there something more sinister lurking within? I waited, and I watched. I thought about every story I'd heard about that place, each one stranger than the last. People claimed the house was haunted, that a man used to live there decades ago, keeping to himself. Some people said he was a recluse. Others claimed he was just gone, vanished without a trace. But one story stuck with me more than the others. It was something my friend told me when we were kids, a kind of neighborhood legend passed from one generation to the next. They said that anyone who took candy from that bowl would be blessed with good fortune. It was like an unspoken rule, a twisted trick-or-treat tradition. But there was a catch: if you took more than one piece, or stayed too long, the luck would turn dark. Some kids in the neighborhood swore by it. They'd show off their candy and brag that their year had gone better, as if the house had actually done them a favor. It sounded ridiculous back then, something kids told each other to make Halloween more exciting. But now, standing there in the cold October air, the candy bowl almost seemed like bait. What if the stories were true? What if taking a piece of candy wasn't just some silly superstition? A creeping thought came to me. What if the candy was there to draw people in, to make them curious enough to get closer? Just as it had with me, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on, something watching. I stayed hidden, debating with myself, my heart pounding louder than ever. Time felt strange, like it was slipping away faster than it should have. Hours passed, and no one appeared. No movement came from inside, just the same empty silence. Then, something happened that I still struggle to put into words. The front door, which had been shut tight all night, slowly creaked open, just a crack. There was no wind, no movement around me. The house had been completely silent until now. It was almost as if it was inviting me in. I stared at that open door, my heart hammering in my chest. It was just a crack, barely noticeable, but it felt like an invitation that no sane person would accept. Every fiber of my being told me to turn around, to forget this creepy tradition and go home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my chance. This was the moment I'd waited for. Maybe all the stories were just that. Stories. Or maybe they were warnings. The neighborhood was quiet now. Too quiet. I told myself that if I just took a closer look, maybe I'd see a person. Some reasonable explanation for all this. But as I stepped closer, the silence seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. The house loomed above, its broken windows and peeling paint like a grimace in the dark. The closer I got, the more I felt that odd sense of dread. That feeling you get when something isn't right, but you're already too close to turn back. I reached the bottom of the steps, and the candy bowl was right there, as if mocking me. I could take a piece and go, just like everyone else. But that door, it seemed to be waiting. I glanced around, reassuring myself that I was alone, and took a deep breath. "It's just an old house," I whispered, as if trying to convince myself. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, and stepped onto the porch. I told myself I'd just peek through the crack, just to see if anyone was inside. As I approached the door, a faint, musty smell hit me, a mix of dust and damp wood. The air around me felt thick, like stepping into a room with no windows. I peered inside, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. What I saw was strange. There was furniture, but it was all covered in white sheets, faded and dusty as if no one had touched it for decades. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, frozen at midnight, his face cracked and worn. The wallpaper peeled in long, jagged strips, revealing dark stains beneath. But it was the silence that unnerved me the most. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, like the house itself was holding its breath. I glanced behind me one last time, the empty street looking almost comforting in contrast. The thought of stepping into the house was insane, but something kept pulling me forward. And then I realized, maybe that's exactly what the house wanted. Maybe it was trying to lure me in. There was a legend, after all, that no one who entered that house alone would ever be the same. Some believed that the house fed on its visitors, draining them of something, a part of their soul, their energy, or even their memories. Kids would dare each other to knock on the door and run, but no one ever talked about going inside. I was about to find out why. My hand touched the doorknob, cold and rough. I could feel a slight tremble in my fingers as I pushed it open, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty rooms like a warning. As I stepped inside, I felt the air shift around me, thick and heavy. The door creaked shut behind me, almost as if it was sealing me in. That was the first moment I realized I might not be alone. The floorboards groaned under my feet, and I took careful steps, the flashlight beam cutting weakly through the dusty air. Shadows seemed to linger at the edges of the room, shapes that danced just beyond the reach of my light. My eyes played tricks on me, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following. As I moved deeper into the house, the sense of dread grew stronger. I glanced into rooms as I passed, each one empty and silent, but filled with a strange unease, as if something was hiding in plain sight. And then I started noticing things. A torn jacket draped over a chair, an old doll slumped against a wall, its glassy eyes catching the light and sending a shiver down my spine. It looked too new, too out of place, like someone had left it there recently. But what really disturbed me were the shoes scattered across the floor in the hallway. They were small children's shoes, some dusty and falling apart, others surprisingly intact, as if they'd just been left, and each one seemed placed deliberately, almost like a trail leading further into the darkness. That's when it hit me. Maybe this wasn't just a house. Maybe it was a trap. The candy, the open door, the strange silence, it all felt like a setup. A carefully laid out lure for anyone curious enough to step inside. And now, standing in that dark hallway, surrounded by remnants of people who had come before me, I realized I'd walked right into it. The air felt colder, and each breath felt heavy, like the house was pressing down on me, tightening its grip. The walls seemed closer, almost pulsing, and I felt a strange energy in the air, as if the house itself was aware. I thought about the stories I'd heard, the whispers of a spirit bound to the house, or something darker, feeding off anyone who dared to enter. In that moment, every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to get out. But when I glanced back, I realized something horrifying. The door was gone. In its place was another hallway, stretching further into the darkness. The house had changed, rearranged itself, like it was trapping me inside. I was no longer in control. Whatever was in here was. I was trapped. No door, no way back. Just endless darkness and the quiet hum of a house that felt alive. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, but the air was so thick it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, the beam growing weaker the further I ventured. Every step felt wrong, as though the house itself was shifting beneath me. I tried to keep calm, reminding myself that there had to be a way out, that this was just an old, abandoned house, nothing more. But then, my light flickered over something strange on the floor. Pieces of paper, crumpled and scattered, lay across the hallway. They looked like old notes, aged and fragile, written in a child's scrawl. I picked one up, my hands trembling, and tried to read the faded writing. The words were messy, almost frantic, as if the writer had been in a hurry. Mom said not to come here, but they told me I had to. They said the house was calling for me. I can't leave now. My heart raced as I dropped the paper, unease creeping down my spine. Who was this child? And why had they written these words? I could feel a shiver of dread. If other kids had come here before, where were they now? I continued down the hallway, my senses on high alert. Each room I passed seemed darker, the shadows thicker, swallowing up the light. I noticed small things in each room, objects that seemed out of place, almost like memories left behind. An old school bag with faded patches, pair of glasses, cracked down the center, resting on a windowsill. Each item carried a haunting familiarity, like they'd been left here by people who never got the chance to return. As I moved deeper, I came to a large room with an old staircase winding up to the second floor. The banister was worn, splintered from age, and each step groaned under my weight as I climbed. Halfway up, I saw a series of portraits on the wall, lined up one after the other. But these weren't ordinary portraits. The faces were blank, only faint outlines where eyes, noses, and mouths should have been. They looked unfinished, almost as if the faces had been erased, leaving only the outlines of people who had once lived here, people who, maybe, had been trapped just like I was. An eerie realization struck me. What if these portraits weren't just decoration? What if they were the faces of everyone who'd disappeared in this house, erased and swallowed by the darkness? I shivered, averting my gaze as I hurried up the remaining steps. At the top, the hallway stretched further than it had any right to. The house seemed endless, shifting, its walls pulsing with a quiet, sinister life. I walked cautiously, listening to the silence, my footsteps muffled by the heavy air. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers, faint and far away, like voices seeping through the walls. They were childlike, pleading. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, desperate, lonely, like they were reaching out for anyone who could hear. As I moved further, I started piecing together fragments of a story. I'd heard rumors over the years that a man had once lived here, a recluse who rarely left the house. Some said he'd lost his family and had gone mad. his grief transforming the house into a prison of sorts. Others claimed he practiced dark rituals, trying to resurrect those he'd lost or to connect with spirits from beyond. But no one knew for sure. All they knew was that, one day, he was gone, leaving the house to rot. And ever since, every Halloween, the house seemed to call to someone new, inviting them in, drawing them deeper until they, too, disappeared. As I passed through a narrow hallway, I saw a doorway slightly ajar at the end. A faint glow leaked through, flickering like candlelight. I hesitated, feeling my pulse quicken, but something compelled me forward. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe fear, but I found myself reaching for the doorknob, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was small, filled with old furniture draped in sheets. In the center, a single candle burned on a dusty table, its flame casting eerie shadows across the walls. And then I saw them, handprints, dozens of them, smeared across the walls in dark, faded stains, small handprints, like those of children. Some were clear, while others seemed to fade into the wallpaper, as if the walls had absorbed them over time. I backed away, my heart pounding. I knew I had to leave. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something I could understand, much less face alone. But just as I turned to go, I felt a shift in the air, a low hum, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing through the walls. The candle flickered, and I saw the shadows begin to move, twisting and stretching, forming shapes that danced around the room. A voice echoed from behind me, soft but unmistakable. "Stay." It was a whisper, a child's voice, pleading, almost desperate. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. But there was no one there, just the shadows, shifting, like they were trying to reach out, to touch me. I stumbled back, my skin prickling with fear. I could feel the house closing in, the walls tightening, and for the first time, I felt like I was part of it, like I'd been swallowed whole, just another ghost trapped in its endless halls. Panic took over, and I sprinted for the door, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I ran down the hallway, back to the staircase, but it was different now. The steps seemed to stretch, twisting into unfamiliar shapes, like the house was trying to trap me. My heart pounded, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I pushed myself forward, my mind screaming for escape. Finally, I reached the bottom of the stairs, my legs shaking, barely holding me up. I glanced toward the front door, but it wasn't there anymore, just another hallway, stretching into darkness. My mind reeled. I was trapped, lost in a place that defied logic, that twisted reality to keep me inside. And then, a chilling thought crossed my mind. Maybe there was never an escape. Maybe the house was alive, feeding on anyone who dared to enter, slowly erasing them, trapping them in shadows, like the portraits on the wall. As the whispers grew louder, filling the air with their desperate pleas, I realized there was only one thing left to do. I had to keep moving. I had to find the truth, whatever it was, and face whatever waited for me at the heart of this house. Because now, I wasn't just another visitor. I was a part of it, drawn into its depths, a story waiting to be told, another soul lost to the dark. I forced myself to keep moving, step by step, down the endless hallway that seemed to stretch further the longer I walked. My flashlight flickered, casting weak shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. I'd lost all sense of time, but every instinct told me I'd been here far too long. The house was draining me, sapping my energy with every step. My head felt heavy, thoughts muddled, and a cold sweat clung to my skin as if the house itself was wrapping around me. I kept walking, my eyes darting from side to side, taking in every twisted detail. The walls were lined with odd objects, relics of other visitors who had once been trapped here. An old, rusted pocket watch hung from a nail, ticking faintly. A child's bracelet lay abandoned on a shelf, its beads cracked and faded. There was a coat rack, too, with jackets and scarves hanging limply, as if they were waiting for someone to come back for them. Everything felt disturbingly familiar, as though I'd seen these things before but couldn't remember where. The hallway ended abruptly at another door, this one slightly ajar. The air was colder here, heavy with a smell that reminded me of damp earth and decay. With a trembling hand, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was vast, much larger than it should have been, given the house's small exterior. Dust hung thick in the air, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. In the center of the room was an old, ornate mirror, its frame carved with twisting vines and faces frozen in expressions of terror. It was covered in dust, but I could still see faint, murky reflections moving in its glass. I approached, drawn to it despite the unease crawling up my spine. As I got closer, my reflection slowly began to sharpen. But something was wrong. My face looked different, pale, sunken, like I'd been here for years, drained and aged by whatever haunted this place. And then, in the background of the mirror, shadows began to take shape. Faint, ghostly figures, children, adults, their eyes hollow and empty, staring back at me through the glass. They were all around me, reflections of people who had come to the house and never left. Some of them looked recent, their clothes modern, their expressions frozen in terror. Others were older, dressed in outdated styles, their faces twisted as if in a silent scream. The house had taken them, just as it was trying to take me. I stumbled back, the flashlight falling from my hand, its beam swinging wildly across the room. The shadows in the mirror flickered, almost as if they were reaching for me, desperate to pull me into the glass. The house seemed to close in, walls shifting, the floorboards groaning as if they were about to give way. A low hum filled the air, a sound that felt more like a vibration than anything audible, pulsed through the room, through me, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, growing louder, faster, until it felt like the house itself was alive, breathing, feeding. And then I heard it again, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Stay with us. Join us." The voices overlapped, becoming louder, a chorus of ghostly whispers echoing through the empty halls. They sounded pleading, almost panicked, like they were desperate for company. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the house felt like it was pressing down on me, sapping my strength, holding me in place. My legs felt heavy, my body drained, as though something was leeching the life right out of me. I forced myself to break free from the mirror's gaze and stumbled toward the door, my heart racing. As I moved, the walls around me seemed to ripple, shifting as if alive, blocking my way. The hallway that I had come through had vanished, replaced by a maze of twisted corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, each one darker and colder than the last. Panic surged through me, and I felt the weight of the house closing in, squeezing the air from my lungs. I turned down another corridor, desperately searching for a way out, but every path only led me deeper into the labyrinth of darkness. It was as if the house was toying with me, leading me in circles, feeding off my fear. Then, up ahead, I saw something, faint flickers of light, like candles glowing in the dark. I hesitated, but with nowhere else to go, I followed. The light led me to a small room, and as I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. The room was filled with hundreds of candles, their flames casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. In the center was a table, and on it lay a book, thick and ancient, its cover cracked and worn. The pages were filled with strange symbols and names, some crossed out, others circled, as if keeping track of something. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, realizing each name had a date next to it, dates that went back decades, even centuries. And there, near the end, I saw a space left blank, an empty line, waiting for a new name. A chill ran down my spine as I realized it was meant for me. I slammed the book shut and backed away, the shadows from the candles growing taller, stretching toward me like dark tendrils. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with their desperate pleas, each voice a lost soul trapped in the endless cycle of the house's curse. In that moment, I knew I had to escape. Whatever force was at work here, it wanted me to stay, to become part of the house's twisted collection of souls. But I wasn't ready to give in. I wasn't ready to let the house claim me. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands slick with sweat, and ran for the door, slamming my shoulder against it until it gave way. I stumbled back into the hall, the whispers following me, echoing in the dark as I raced through the twisting corridors, each turn leading me further into the unknown. And then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a faint glimmer of moonlight seeping through a crack in the wall. I pushed toward it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and found myself in a small room with a single, grimy window. Without thinking, I threw myself against it, feeling the glass shatter as I tumbled through, falling hard onto the grass outside. I lay there, gasping for air, my body aching, blood dripping from cuts and scrapes. The house loomed above me, silent and still once more, its windows dark and lifeless. But as I looked up, I saw a faint shadow in one of the windows, watching, waiting. I didn't stay to see more. I staggered to my feet, stumbling down the street, not daring to look back. The whispers still echoed in my mind, haunting and hollow, their voices fading as I put distance between myself and the house. When I finally made it home, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted, every inch of me sore and bruised. I told myself it was over, that I was safe, but every Halloween since, I felt it, the house, this pull stronger than ever, as if it's waiting for me to come back. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear those voices, calling me, whispering my name, and maybe, just maybe, one day, I won't be able to resist. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been some twisted hallucination, a trick of the mind spurred by too many ghost stories. But no matter how many times I tried to brush it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had left its mark on me. It was like a shadow in my mind, a presence lingering just out of reach, pulling at the edges of my thoughts. I felt restless, uneasy, as if I'd left a part of myself behind in those darkened halls. The people I told didn't understand. Some laughed, some shook their heads, while others just looked at me like I was crazy. They couldn't feel what I felt, that cold pull at the back of my mind, as if the house was still there, watching, waiting. Even now, I sometimes catch myself glancing at it through my bedroom window. The house stands at the end of the street, silent and still, but I know better. I know it's more than just old wood and cracked walls. There's something else, something alive, that waits for anyone foolish enough to answer its call. And then there's the whispering. It never fully went away. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is silent, I hear it again, a faint voice, calling my name, pleading, as if the souls trapped within the house are still reaching out, hoping for some release from the torment that binds them. But it's not just them. There's something darker, something that feels older than time, lurking in that place, something that feeds on fear and solitude, drawing people in, trapping them forever. As Halloween approaches, the pull grows stronger. I feel it gnawing at me, a quiet hum that only grows louder with each passing day. The candy bowl will appear on the porch again, just like it always does, waiting to tempt anyone daring or foolish enough to take a piece. And while most will pass by, laughing it off as a harmless prank or a spooky tradition, I know the truth. I've seen the shadows, heard the whispers, felt the house press down on me, demanding more. So, if you ever find yourself near that house, or any place like it, listen to that feeling of dread. Trust it. Don't let curiosity be your downfall. Some mysteries are better left alone. The house doesn't let go once it has its grip on you, and I fear that one day, I might give in to its call. It's a whisper, soft yet insistent, growing louder with each passing year, each Halloween, like a ticking clock waiting for its final strike. Because the truth is, some doors aren't meant to be opened. Some places are forgotten for a reason, and once you step inside, you can't ever truly leave. The house isn't done with me, and every time I feel that pull, I wonder if I'll eventually give in, if the whispers will grow too strong to resist. And when that day comes, I know I won't be coming back. So consider this a warning. One last piece of advice to anyone listening. If you see a house that looks too dark, too silent, that pulls at you with a strange, heavy feeling, turn back. Trust the dread in your gut and leave it alone, because once you're inside, it's not just your curiosity that will haunt you. It's the house itself. It's endless, hungry silence that will follow you, year after year, Halloween after Halloween, until it finally claims what it's waiting for. And if one day you find yourself standing at that doorstep, don't be surprised if the door creaks open, as if it's been waiting just for you.